Hello everyone, and welcome to the Core Component Assessment Practices and Principles webinar, providing you an overview of the T Level Employer Set Project for Building Services Engineering and On-Site Construction. My name is Alison Whittle, and I'm the Post-16 Technical Advisor at City & Guilds. I'm joined today by Jason Howe, who is the Technical Advisor for Construction at City & Guilds, and Mike Scarrett, who is a product specialist at EAL. Just to let you know that on the GoTo webinar, there are handouts for the ESP, which are providing some centre guidance and some sample candidate sort of tasks. So you will be able to access those. I think Jason's going to be popping those into the chat. So I'm just going to move on with the slides now. So as normal, a couple of housekeeping rules before we sort of begin. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but please do type any questions in the questions box and we will try to answer them all at the end. Just please bear in mind we are delivering this webinar from home and in different locations, so please do bear with us in case of any technical hitches, time lags in the slides, or the usual background noises. We've allowed an hour, as there is a huge amount of information, but I'm very happy to stay online for another 15 minutes after the webinar has ended to answer any last-minute questions that you may have. If we do experience any serious technical hitches, we're going to end the webinar and then record it. And the recording and slides will then be sent out to each of you, along with your CPD certificate once we collate all your attendee details. So just to set the scene, we understand that T-levels are brand new and the technical qualification within the T-level is very different to a VRQ or MVQ type qualification. And as such, the teaching will be very different. So the main purpose of this webinar is to support delivery staff in preparing your learners for the ESP, the Employer Set Project, core components of the T-level qualification. Now, before we start, I'm sure you know all of us by now, but in case of any new attendees that may have joined, these are the people supporting you for the BSE Onsite T levels. So as I mentioned before, we've got myself, Jason and Mike, who are on the webinar with me today. Rob Mallender is the Technical Advisor for Building Services Engineering. Unfortunately, he's been unable to join us today. So on this slide, I've just put some good links for you really there for you. Just the curriculum planners. I'm sure you've accessed them if you've been with us before. Curriculum planning webinar, and I've put some key dates there for your exam dates for on-site and building services engineering. So the agenda. So what I am covering today is the focus is going to be on the Employer Set Project. We're going to be looking at the assessment window, the tasks, the timings, what evidence that you need to supply, what's being assessed, and also what's not being assessed. The importance of assessment objectives, and obviously some, hopefully plenty of time for Q&A. What I won't be able to talk about today are particular occupational specialisms, progression routes, industry placements, and reviewing of any of the particular content. So I've tried to, I think, approach this really from your perspective, and that's really, what would I need to know? What would I want the answers to, for if I was teaching this? And I will also want to make sure that this is relevant, what we're covering is relevant to you. So this may be some new information. The Employer Set Project is going to be released to you on the 28th of March. Now you're going to be notified how you can access this. All 6 tasks are going to be released to you at the same time to help you plan your assessments. There will be an additional support, a guide, which is going to be published in mid-March, and it's going to be called the Summer 2022 Guide for the ESP, and that will contain critical centre information. on how you upload the evidence, all the rules around the ESP. So I didn't want that to take up the main webinar today. So there will be guidance published that you will need to know for administration purposes for there. We're going to be looking at, so when can I release the ESP to learners? So the assessment window opens on the 4th of April and it closes on the 13th of May. So during that time, that is when you will release the Employer Set project to your learners. This is something that you may not know, that it is one task at a time, and those tasks must be in order of sequence, which will become clear later on. Once that learner has completed that task, they are not allowed to return to it. It must be submitted to you, and the only time they can have that task back again is to read through it. They will not be allowed to make any amendments once one task is submitted at a time. That's all going to be in your centre guidance. Can learners retake and resit the ESP, and if so, when? Yes, I've got all the dates available for you during this webinar. There will be an opportunity for a resit or a retake in the autumn series, and that runs from the 7th of November to the 2nd of December. I just want to touch on that a little bit later on. And how is the ESP marked and graded? It is externally set by City and Guilds and marked by City and Guilds in EAL. An overview of how this is marked is I'm going to be covering in the webinar presentation today. I have a request from our assessment team who say, please can you remind your attendees that it is crucial that centres read all of the assessment documentation ahead of delivering the assessments, because I think they must know that as teachers we just want to get straight onto the brief, which unfortunately can cause problems later on. So these are other questions here that you can see. So all of these following questions are going to be answered in the webinar, which is how is the ESP structured? In other words, what do learners have to do? What evidence do I need to provide to City and Guilds? How long do they have to complete the ESP? What does each task consist of? And what do we need to do to keep the assessment evidence secure? So I just wanted to make clear that this is what is going to be all included in the webinar to make sure that content is relevant to you. I'm sure you've seen these before, but just to provide for anybody that's possibly not or new to T levels and isn't delivering them this year or intending to deliver them from September, this is what an overview of the core assessments look like. So you've seen BSE on the top. So you can see straight away that there are going to be two externally sort of set and externally marked exams that cover the knowledge from the core component. The top half is the BSE and the bottom half is the construction, the on-site construction. So just to clarify today, my main aim is the Employer Set project for today. And they are exactly the same information for both BSE and on-site. The only difference being is the subject content within the ESP will be different for each one, because obviously one will be geared more towards building services engineering and the other towards on-site construction. So just to clarify, both Employer Set projects, one for BSE, one for on-site, are 17 hours in total. They each have 6 timed tasks and they are each marked out of 100. So just to make sure that you know that it's externally marked, externally set. And I think it's probably really useful to show you how the project is assessed and marked, because as a teacher, that would always inform my teaching. Once I know what sort of the guidelines around it, it always used to help inform the teaching. So here are your assessment windows for the summer and autumn series, and I've also included the retake and resit dates. The left-hand side of the slide is on-site construction and the right-hand side is BSE. So the ESP is released to you The 28th of March, you will get it as a tutor. You will be given guidance of how to release this to your learners in the guidance that's coming in the mid-March, but it opens on the 4th of April, closes on the 13th of May for both Onsite and BSE. You will get the results of those on the 17th of August, and you will not be able to release those to learners until the 18th of August, in line with A-level results day. If you look at the bottom half, you can also see that you've got your autumn 2022 assessment date, 7th of November to the 2nd of December. Again, those results will be released to your centres on the 15th of March, and you are not allowed to release them to learners until the day after, the 16th of March. I think it's really important to make it clear at this point, although we've put retake and resit in November, they don't have to be a resit or a retake. You can use the November autumn series as your first exam series should you wish to. However, if you use that, all the core components have to be sat in one window. That is the 2 exams and the ESP together. If you choose to let your learners sit the exams, say, and the ESP in the April-May window, and they fail the ESP, they only have to take the ESP again in the next window, not both exams, and vice versa. So for the first sitting, all 3 core components must be taken together. So I do hope that is clarified that for you. So moving on now, so this is, I'll be going into detail of how this Employer Set project is laid out now and what evidence you're going to need. So first of all, it's a classroom-based assessment. It's set by us, and it must be undertaken in controlled conditions. And that information for that is within your candidate and centre guidance packs. Your learners will probably be more familiar with the term controlled assessment because they'll have taken controlled assessments throughout their secondary school. The ESPs link to the core skills, which are obviously different to other skills, and the core skills are problem solving, research, communication, and working collaboratively with others. It's in the form of a realistic brief, and that brief is going to be achieved through completion of tasks, which are classroom-based tasks, and 1 presentation. It's not about the skills of a plumber or a joiner or a bricklayer. It's the knowledge and theories and concepts of a problem that they'll be given and how to pull that plan together. Sometimes you hear things, words sort of from other presentations are called metacognition, but all that simply means is it just teaches learners to think about how they think. That's all that word means. It's asking to think about a process and put it together. So the number of tasks within the project are going to stay exactly the same every year. So you'll always have the same 6 tasks, but what will be different is the new brief will be set for each series that will cover different topics. But the brief for the ESP will only ever draw from information from the core mandatory knowledge of the TQ. I'm hoping this is clear for you all because I do appreciate it's a huge amount of information here. So if we look at, where does it draw information from? So all versions of the ESP, regardless of which version you have, will always contain these same subjects. So for BSE, you can see it's health and safety, construction design principles, the same as Onsite. It's sustainability principles in BSE, construction sustainability principles in Onsite, and there's an extra one in BSE, which is obviously your building services, engineering systems. So just to clarify that, it only ever draws from that common core knowledge and skills that sits in the core modules for either BSE or on-site construction. So obviously they will differ slightly. Quite new, I think, for qualifications that are vocational and technical is that learners will be marked on the quality and the accuracy of the work that they produce, which I think is something that's quite new. So there is going to be very specific further advice and guidance published in mid-March, and that's going to provide you and your exams officers and teaching staff with all of the administration information and support that you need for uploading the evidence and the security of exam papers and assessments, etc. But as a teacher, I know how you like to know information. So what I've just included there is a couple of sort of bits of information that you will be responsible for storing sort of work, especially for the ESP in between. So that might, you might have to think about how you're going to store that. Is it a locked cupboard, collecting memory sticks at the end, and where are they going to be kept that, that candidates won't be able to access that. I've also included a YouTube and a link to the JCQ documents, but they are quite lengthy and they are quite generic. So, but in case you want that information before we publish ours, I've just provided that for you. I'm sorry I'm whizzing through these because I want to get to the core of this. So just to start from really the beginning, the Employer Set project has got 6 different tasks, and there is a time allocation for each of the tasks. It totals 17 hours in total, and it's marked out of 100. Now, as I said to you, there will be some key guidance around how the materials should be released to your candidates, for example, one at a time, and that's going to be detailed in the guidance. But you must not release any of these tasks or materials to candidates until the assessment has formally begun. You can see that there are marks allocated to each of those tasks, but these marks are based on the weighting and the level of skill required for the task rather than the time allocated. So I think the message really here is don't make the mistake of assuming that time equals quality or quantity of marks, because it is all about the skill levels being assessed that provide those marks. The structure of the ESP, the number of tasks, and the weighting and marks are going to remain the same for every exam series. As I said, it is just the brief that's going to change, and the evidence may change slightly. So they're obviously worth checking that one. This is in the guidance. I've broken this down further on. So what I've really done is I'm going to be going into quite a lot of detail for each of those tasks, and I'm going to provide an overall summary for you at the end of this, because it's not always as clear, I don't think, as it could be. So hopefully by the end of it, it will make complete sense to you of what you need to do. So we all love assessment objectives, and in this particular instance, it's pretty key really, because by using these cleverly, you can really work out what's going to be examined and what's going to be assessed and how many marks are. So that's my aim today, is to make sure that you do leave with that information. It's just giving you an overview here of the assessment objectives and the typical evidence that we're going to be producing for this. You can see, I think on assessment objective 2, it has the highest weighting for applying knowledge and skills. Now that's an Ofqual requirement, and Ofqual have set all of the assessment objectives, and they have made a decision that AO2 has to have over 50% of the marks allocated to application of knowledge and skills. Now there's a much more guidance within the qualification handbooks around the assessment objectives, and these are going to become a lot clearer when we start to unpick further into the presentation how the marks are allocated against each of the assessment objectives, but more importantly, what is being assessed in each task, and equally importantly, what is not being assessed in each task. So I'm just going to really quickly go through the next, how these are broken down a little bit further. So bear in mind, the highest weighting is AO2, application of knowledge and skills. We've got 10% is weighted about, do they select the relevant techniques and resources to meet the brief? You know, bit common sense, I would have thought. 16% is against maths, English and digital skills. And AO5 is only 6%, which is pure evaluation, which really is down to one task, I think, at the end. So we'll just go through those again. Now, these are how the assessment objectives have been broken down. And it's sort of, you know, if you look at each of the tasks that I'm going to be looking into, I'll break down this amount of detail so you can support your learners. Quite unusually, you can see there that in the assessment objectives, you can see that in some, there are parts A and B and even C in some cases. So if we look at AO2, you'll see that AO2A is assessing the core knowledge, and AO2B are the skills that we talked about before, which is communication, working collaborative, solving problem solving, and primary research. AO4 is an interesting one, because if you look at how that's broken down, and if you focus that AO4A is looking at maths, AO4B is English, and AO4C is digital. And AO5 is all about evaluation, if we looked at the previous slide. So please bear these in mind, because I'm going to show you how you can apply these to your exams and your tasks. So further down, can I just go back to that slightly, because I always question, why has it been broken down? And I just wanted to share with you, the reason they're broken down is to help the markers interpret the assessment objectives accurately. So it's actually more for accurate marking, to make sure that those learners get the marks that, you know, they deserve, and there's no ambiguity amongst them. So this table here is, again, showing you how those 100 marks for the ESP, the Employer Set Project, are distributed against each of those tasks. And that's how the assessment objectives I showed you in the previous slide are mapped across to each of those tasks. So you can see in task 1, we're going to be unpicking that. You can see the assessment objectives related to those tasks. So for example, looking at that, I know straight away there is no maths, there is no English, but there is digital skills, which is AO4C. So I'm not looking at anything that they get, the English and maths there, but the digital skills are quite critical, because obviously it's a research project. There is no evaluation within this, but there is looking at the core knowledge, but no core skills. So just get used to having a look at that, and that will hopefully inform your teaching. So the next couple of slides, I'm going to be breaking this right down to each task and each mark and each evidence, each sort of evidence sort of criteria that you need to know. So for the first task, they're going to be asked, the learners are going to be asked to undertake some research. And I've put in, you know, what that is. You know, it's about studying, you know, study of materials and sources to establish facts. And they have 3 hours to complete that task, and that equates to 9 marks. If we look underneath there, you can see how those 9 marks are distributed. There are 2 marks for AO1, which is AO1 is your planning skills and strategies, going back to those assessment objectives. AO2A has 3 marks, which is applying knowledge to the context of it. There is no core skills involved in this. AO3, we have 2 marks, which is making sure that they do select the relevant techniques and resources. As we mentioned, there's AO4C, which is the use of digital skills, and it does not include maths and English. So what we've put in here, what do the candidates have to do? So first of all, they've got to do a research. They'll get their brief and it will give them exactly what they have to do. And we are asking for a minimum of 3 sides of A4 paper for this research, and we need that as part of your evidence. They also have to keep a record of where they source that material from. So that would be your websites or any sources that they have that, and that is not part of sort of the 3 sides of A4. So please remind them to keep a record, to cut and paste their websites onto that. And that's really the evidence that they need for this particular task. Moving on to task 1.2. What you're going to see a lot of within these tasks is the word minimum. And I just want to explain a little bit more about that. So task 1.2 is about a report. So those candidates have to do a report from their brief. They have 6 hours and 26 marks equated to this. And it's about something that they will have investigated. Now this task carries, I think it's the most marks, and it's marked against all of the assessment objectives except AO5, which is, again, it's about evaluation. And of course, evaluation is never normally assessed until the end of a project. So looking at this again, they have 6 marks against AO1, their planning skills and strategies. They have 12 marks against AO2, equally between knowledge and the core skills, 6 marks of each. Then there are 2 marks to make sure that they've selected the relevant techniques and resources to meet the brief. And again, you can see AO4, A, B and C, which is English, maths and digital, each have 2 marks each, totaling 6 marks. Now, you may have to split this project up. You can maybe, you're not available for 6 hours. It's entirely how you deliver that, as long as it's sort of consecutive sessions. So we understand it may not all be on the same day. It may be different days, it may be different sessions, as long as it's consecutive and you are able to keep what the candidates produced so far secure. So within this, you can see here, what do we want off you? We want a report. The report has to have a minimum of 1,500 words. And again, the record of where they source that information from. And the sources and the reference are not included in that minimum 1,500 word count. And the reason I'm emphasizing the word minimum here is because it's to give you clear guidance on what is needed for marking. And the word count is there to set an expectation of the minimum quantity expected. And the reason that is because in order to demonstrate that all those assessment objectives can be assessed, we require that level of detail. So if candidates produce evidence below this expectation, it suggests that they've not produced sufficient evidence and therefore may not be able to access all of the mark bands. So it's pretty critical that you look about the minimum evidence there. So the next slide here is a project plan. And a project plan is something that you need to create a successful project. It outlines everything that's needed. Learners have 3 hours to complete that task, and it has 24 marks allocated to it. Again, you can see the assessment objectives. There is a huge amount of AO2, which you can see is the application of knowledge and skills. So its knowledge has got 10 marks, and the core skills are 6 marks for this. AO1, planning skills and strategies. If we move on to have they selected the right techniques and resources, there's 2 marks. And again, you can see it is only English that is assessed within that project plan. There is no maths, no digital, and no evaluation there. What do we require? So we require a programme of work and a supporting statement. And what we'd like from that is the programme of work must include the key stages of the project, the detail of which trades will be involved in the project in relation to your chosen technology, be that BSE or Onsite, how long the project will take for them to do, as in the project outline, and the order in which the activities will be completed in. This will be, all the guidance will be in the brief. We also require a supporting statement for learners to justify their plan, and that is about approximately 750 words. And we'd expect them to have taken into consideration any health and safety, your access and egress, specialist equipment, specialist contractors, waste management, and how the key job roles work within this project. So we're giving you the sort of outline of what we need really as evidence for that. Moving on to the presentation side of it, and this is pretty key as well here. There are 2.5 hours the learners have to complete that, and it carries 18 marks. So for this task, please do refer to the full centre guidance, which is attached to this webinar, because it gives a lot of information on that. So I'm just going to whiz through the AOs. So for AO1, which is your core planning skills and strategies, is 4 marks. There again, AO2, knowledge of application of knowledge and skills, equally 6 marks each. Relevant techniques, selected and strategies, select relevant techniques and resources, 3 marks. There's no English. Maths is being assessed in that, so maths, no maths, there is English, and there's no digital. Sorry, I was mistaken there. So there is English, but there is no maths involved in that, and no evaluation there. So they don't have to use technology to present this, but I would encourage that they do PowerPoints just to keep it's a lot easier for learners if they can. So the presentations have to be scheduled and timed and allow time for questioning within that 30 minutes of their presentation skills. So they'll have 2 hours to prepare and 30 minutes to present and answer questions. Types of questions are provided in the guidance as well. So it's really important that you look at the centre guidance. Just going to close that one, sorry, I had a peek on there. And the evidence that you're going to need, learners need for this one, is if you look at the evidence, we will require a video recording of the presentation, and it really needs to be clear from that supporting evidence which candidate is, it's attributed to. In other words, can you get the candidate to state their name just so we know, maybe their name, and hold up a candidate number for the obviously the assessors, so they're very clear on who they're assessing. We require the presentation materials, in other words, the slides and the handouts the learner is using. And we also require you to complete an assessor observation record, and you should really read through to make sure you're clear about the points that you need to be observing. I'm going to be going into a little bit more detail about that assessor observation record, I think, on one of the next slides. We're moving on to the final sort of 2 tasks now. So this is slide 2.1. Now for this task here, learners have to work in small groups to discuss 2 options, and they're given a task and they have to discuss the options and the potential advantages and disadvantages of each of the options. They must take notes and they have to be observed by yourselves or by an examiner during the discussions, and then they have to draft an email of no less than 300 words long, and again that word minimum is coming in, so please be aware of that. They have 1.5 hours to complete this task, and there are 15 marks allocated to it, very heavily weighted on the application of knowledge and core skills, AO2 and AOB. Again, the relevant techniques, and within this there is no maths, English or digital assessed whatsoever, But again, we have AO5 coming in for the first time there, which is all about evaluation. So AO5 is carry out tasks and evaluate for fitness of purpose, which is 2 marks. Again, referring all the time back to the assessment objectives. The evidence that we require for this is going to be a video recording of your discussions. It's going to be some, and of course, again, before it must be recorded in a suitable format, be what that, whatever format you decide, and we will provide guidance on that. And it must be available for marking and moderation purposes. We also require the written discussion notes from the group discussion, and that, as I said, email draft with a minimum of 300 words within that email. You also have to produce alongside that an assessor observation record, and that's a record of your candidates' discussions, interactions and collaboration. Now I'm going to give you some key hints and tips on how to complete this further on in the presentation there. Coming on to the very final task. This is the evaluation of the task, and it's one thing, I don't know how you always feel as teachers, but it was a word that learners were never really familiar with. They didn't understand how to evaluate. So just to break that down further, I've always said to them, tell me what went well, what didn't go so well, and what would you have done differently next time. And that really covers, a basic evaluation for those for learners who really sort of don't quite grasp the concept of evaluation. They have 1 hour to complete this task, and it carries 8 marks. And those 8 marks are distributed, as you can see on the evaluation. There are 4 marks against the English, I think, yep, it's English, because of course it's writing and accuracy of work. And the other 4 marks are on evaluation, which is assessment objective AO5, heavily weighted for AO5, which is carry out tasks and evaluate for fitness of purpose. So the evidence we require is an evaluation, and that evaluation has to be a minimum of 750 words long. They can really choose their own format for that evaluation should they wish, and they can structure it in a way that they feel is most clear and appropriate, because it's certainly not about right and wrong, it's about how they want to present that, and providing they meet those assessment objectives, that's what the markers will be looking for on this one. Now, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to go back and revisit some of those slides, because I'm hoping that by revisiting them, they're going to make a little bit more sense than what they would have done at the beginning. So all the way through this, I've talked about assessment objectives and how they're weighted and what they need to do, and I've broken those down. So hopefully this won't seem as strange as it might have done to begin with. And now, when I've talked about maths, English and digital, you can see when you look at those assessment objectives of what I mean by breaking down when I say there's 2 marks for AO4, AO4B, AO4A. So at least you will know what's being assessed, and I think that's pretty critical. And if you look at AO5, it's very, very slight, really. There isn't a huge amount of assessment objectives, and I think altogether there's only ever 6. The weighting is 6 for that, so it's sort of quite few. I wouldn't be putting a huge amount of emphasis on that until you come to your evaluation, which is the final task, which is 2.2. I've just, for easiness sake here, I just want to explain about marking grids. So what I've done really is I've just highlighted one of the tasks, which is 1.1 as an example, and I want to take you through where those 9 marks, how they are worked out, because you've seen the mark distribution. What we haven't shown you is where those marking grids are. And the reason being is that you don't actually mark this, it's City and Guilds mark it, but I want to give you some hints and tips on how you can achieve the highest marks for your learners there. So if you follow that, 1.1, it's the research task, 9 marks. Now in this grid here, this is the marking grid, and these are all available in the centre guidance, and I've put links to those here so you can see the BSE marking grid and the construction marking grid there. So you can see how the different bands descriptors relate to those 9 marks. Now if you look at the wording within this, so the band 1 descriptor, to get between 1 and 3 marks for that, taking into account those AOs that you can see in that column, they're looking for some evidence of a planned approach to research. It results, that lacks a bit of order and organisation. There are only some elements of the core knowledge reference. They can't pick that out. It's not really, it's more focused on one area than maybe another. If we move into the band 2 descriptor, you can see it's got words like organised, planned, consistently referenced. And if we look at the digital skills applied consistently, moving up to the bands 7, 8 and 9, the band descriptor, you can look at the language here. It's got things like systematic, clear, comprehensive, detailed. My hint and tip is when you are filling in your assessor observation record, please try and use similar language that are in these marking grids, because if you use this similar language, it guides that marker to where those marks are. If you're just using sort of undescriptive language, it's really hard for those markers to pick out those higher marks. So I think realistically, use those bands, and you can see that this will be key to your observation record. And it's really you accounting when you have those 2 observation records. It's your account of that candidate's performance, and you can really make it clear to those examiners, reflecting on this differentiation across the marking bands. And if you use the same in your observation record, it really is a good hint and tip. So this is probably my attempt really just to try and sort of explain. It's a really high level overview of how the overall core grade is generated. And I don't really want to spend a huge amount of time on it because you don't actually mark it, but I really think it's helpful if you know how it's marked. So what happens is from exam paper 1, you'll get raw marks, and raw marks just means the actual marks. In some cases it's at a 90, some cases it can be out of 110, and they are the raw marks. They are then added to the raw marks in paper 2, and that gives one overall sort of large figure, so if you're adding a 60 and 110 or whatever it is together, then they are both of those marks are combined, and then they are converted using what we call UMS, which is a uniform mark scale. And that's before the grade boundaries are set. And then the ESP raw mark, which is out of 100, is then converted to the UMS. Both of those are added together, and then they're looked. The UMS then generates a final grade of A star to U. Although U is not a grade, it is unclassified. So your learners will not be getting a U, they'll be getting A star to E. And U means that there are no marks available if they get if they haven't really met the minimum standard there. Now, I'm really happy to go into great detail of how uniform marks work and how raw marks are set against, if anybody wants that level of detail. But I didn't want to waste your time going into that unless you specifically want it. As I promised, to summarise, and I think this will really help you, this is the evidence that you need from your learners to upload for marking to City and Guilds. And I've just said, so I've labelled each of the tasks, each of the the evidence that we expect to see for marking. I've only included a minimum there. I've also put a maximum there to help you on the report, 1.2. So I've sort of, given a little bit of sort of support with that. I've put that down so you will know very clearly what evidence you need to collect. I've also put some key dates for you. You're going to be getting these 6 tasks all together on the 28th of March. You will have access to this so you can plan your assessments. The ESP window opens on the 4th of April and closes on the 13th of May. And you will be getting really specific, detailed guidance on how you upload your evidence and how you administer for the tasks for the learners and what your roles and responsibility are in the security of that. So I do feel like I've done a non-stop talk and that you're probably all going to need a huge amount of strong coffee after this, but I'd like to sort of thank you so much for listening. I'm going to stay online. I know it's been a